Hey, 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 happy 2020. What's up, guys? Welcome, everyone. Dylan, Damien, and D, what's up, dudes? We will get going. We're going to be looking at the 2019 performance for a handful of names, primarily the large cap names. So, I'm not going to be looking at any of these micro cap, $10 million market cap names or anything like that, mostly because if you look at those from a percentage basis, I mean, the percentage numbers are just going to be much bigger. It's going to skew the things a little bit. And they just don't have enough trading volume. They don't have enough liquidity, generally speaking. So a little bit easier to manipulate. But the bigger cap names, it's always interesting to see how they perform, to see how they did, to see what predictions were right, were wrong, biggest movers, biggest losers, best hodl, most volatile, most overhyped, biggest surprise. So we're going to be covering all of that today. I'll go through those in order. We'll start with a high-level view of, just the overall market over the last year, and then we'll go from there. And if you guys want to look at a handful of names, we'll take a look at what's going on here today, some of the recent action. We'll certainly do that. We'll make time and keep it a little casual today, as is usually the case around here anyway. So thanks for the comments. Welcome, Danny Herman, S13. We got some of the Node insiders popping in. And so I just sent out the link. I just posted it on Twitter. So we'll give it another minute or so here, and then we'll get to it. I've got the 3-day chart here. Let me pull up some recent time frame here, and I'll just kick off the stream with a little bit of BTC review, a little bit of analysis here, and just to kind of set the tone. And then we'll start with kind of the awards, the crypto awards, the biggest winners and losers of the last year. Welcome. Is it Ellie? Ellie? I'm sorry, I can't read that. All right, so let's see what we got going on. So looking at the chart here, this is the 1-day chart, BTCUSD on Coinbase. Price has been very choppy, very range bound here. After that big outside day we had on December 18th, just not a lot of follow through. It's been a somewhat quiet, I guess you can say, holiday season. There's been some potential moves. All right. Looks like, we were about to break out, just no follow through. That's really the way to put it. There has just been no follow through one way or the other. But as we know, that doesn't generally last. We're going to see this range breakout eventually. There's been a very clear support zone being established here. Now that 7,000, 7,100 level continues to say, to be support, continues to be a little bit of an accumulation zone, but it's not exactly a big bullish zone yet. You haven't seen any follow through the upside. During my last live stream, I think it was still over here, and I mentioned 7,600 was my first key target to be watching. I took a quick trade up, started to scale out of that, and sure enough, that's where it paused. 7,800 was the next big number. We didn't even get close to that. And so those numbers generally remain the same, not a lot of change from the very near-term perspective. It's been very choppy, very volatile. If you zoom in and look at the shorter time frames, the swings are a little bit more pronounced. You can see these big pops, a couple $100 very quickly, and then just giving it all right back. Looks like it gets going again. For those of you that are following along with the Node Insiders alerts, you've probably seen the emails come through. The daily strategy hasn't changed at all. You can see it's been flat since 12/18. That was when it went flat after being short for about 10 days. And so it did pretty good in terms of covering the short and catching most of this move. Then it went flat after this big reversal day, and it's just been signaling flat. However, the 4-hour chart has been a little bit more volatile here. I was on travel, a little bit out of the office last week, but I was getting the emails and I saw, it was flat, then it was long, then it was flat, then it was long. I was like, what's going on here? Because previously it had just been short for a long time as well, and it was just getting caught in the chop, right? It was long and flat, and then long and then flat, and just all of that choppiness, and so that just tends to happen. Again, that's an automated trading signal based on my trading strategy, which is a trend following strategy. And so during the chop, during the sideways action, you got to just wait for those range to break, right? Otherwise, you'll get the whipsaw. And that's what we're seeing right now, a little bit of that whipsaw effect here. And so for now, I'm just going to be patient, waiting for this train to break. Now, to be fair, I'm still leaning a little bit more bullish. The fact that it popped off the lows here from 6,400 and just kind of has been sitting tight. There certainly has been some distribution every time it tries to pop through to that 76 level. But, I'm still leaning a little bit bullish because there's certainly some support that keeps holding up here. Until that gives way, just going to lean on the bullish camp and look for some potential movement to the upside. We saw this reversal potentially taking place after, if you zoom out, it's been a pretty steep and just kind of steady drop since June. It's starting to flatten out a little bit. Now, like I said, we haven't seen any confirmation, and it's very clear. You can see it's just been sideways at that point, but at least it's sideways, right? At least it's holding up here. That 6,400 number was a pretty long time support level. We wanted to see it hold. So far, it has held, and that was after slightly undercutting the prior low and then having a very strong reversal, a bullish reversal off that point. Now I want to see if it can follow through. In the big picture, that's short time frame. If you're trading and all that, it's very frustrating because it's just choppy and boring. And from a trading perspective, that's really what it is. It's boring, and there's really nothing to do, right? There's other markets to trade. Generally, as a trader, you don't want to be stuck in this, right? This is very poor trading environment. You want momentum. You want some stronger volatility that breaks out of range and moves and gives you entries and exits and all that. These little $200 ranges, they're just not worth trading, to be honest with you. They're really boring unless you're on high leverage and you're trading, very short-term time frames. But like I said, the holidays, probably don't want to be doing that anyway. But that's where we're at. So looking at Bitcoin, if we go back to the weekly chart, the broader downtrend continues. The trend is not your friend unless you've been short for most of this. It just continues to drift lower. The moving averages have inverted bearishly. You've got the 10 EMA on the weekly trending below the 22 EMA. Volume has started to decline a little bit. You're seeing more bullish spikes to the upside, but nonetheless, the trend is still very much going sideways. But if you zoom in and look at the last month and a half or so, it's been a pretty narrow range, right? You see the last 6 candles starting to get choppy, maybe holding up here. But until we see, some more action out of this, this is a low volatility time frame. I won't pull it up now, but if you pull up charts like, that have the Bollinger Bands or Keltner channels or average true range, right? Those type of volatility indicators, they're all starting to really narrow, really tighten up, really get small, and that's because of this, right? That's because of this very tight range that's being developed here over the last month and a half. But as we know, that doesn't very often last a long time. If we saw this last year, right, we started to get really narrow. It got pretty tight range here for about 2 months, and then things really started to get going again. Same thing back here, right? So it happens, but it doesn't last like, a year. Hopefully not, right? That'd be brutal. But there have been other names. Many of the alts have been continuing to show some, very brief runs, but nonetheless, if you're looking to trade, that's been where most of the action has been at anyway in the last couple of weeks, is some of the alts that have been trending. Decentraland has been one. Basic Attention is popping back up again. Land has been active here as of late. So there's been a few names that have, shown a little life. But as you will see here shortly, when we get into some of the awards or lack thereof, we will we'll see that the broader altcoin market has been pretty dismal. And if you've been holding, right, from the long-term perspective, as I know many people have, 2019 has, or was, not has, it's gone, was not a kind year for crypto in general and for the altcoin space specifically. But we'll see what 2020 looks like. And so let's get to some of those here. So let's zoom in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just start very quickly going through some of these charts, not doing a whole lot of technical analysis, but what I want to focus on is some of the performance that we saw here. I'm going to focus on a handful of names. We'll cover biggest winners, biggest losers, best hold, best, most overhyped, and biggest surprise. And again, this is my personal opinion. This is not a, I did post a chart yesterday on Twitter, by the way, with some charts. I was pulling some data and doing some number crunching, and it was an interesting exercise. I won't look at it here, but what I did was I pulled the last, the top 200 names by market cap rank, right? So that's a big list. Rarely do I trade a number 200 market cap rank, but I was just looking at the numbers. Some interesting facts that came out of that. The top 50 saw a little bit of movement in and out of the group, but it proved to be a pretty resilient bunch in terms of market cap dominance. And out of the top 50 cryptos from the start of 2019, we saw, let me see here what the list says. We saw only one sec here. We saw nine names leave the list, 9 new names come back, right? So about 20%. Not a huge change, but it gets interesting when you look at the next tier. If you look at the 50 to 100, it was almost a 60% turnover in terms of the number of names that left the list and new names came back. And if you look at the top 200 in general, it was 79 names left the list. So 79 names that were in the top 200 at the start of 2019 were not in the top 200 at the end of 2019. So a lot of turnover, a lot of churn. Many names just fell by the wayside. A whole bunch of new small caps came right back to the top of the list, right? And so you see a lot of that churn, but it was interesting to see how resilient the top 50 names were. And in fact, the top 10 names did not change at all in terms of some of the, they didn't leave the top 50 at all, right? So they were just all there. They moved around a lot, but you saw a lot of the same names that we've seen in years past, all the big caps, right? Litecoin, Ethereum, XRP, Stellar, Binance Coin, like all those names were pretty much holding their ground as far as market cap dominance. But that's not the full picture. If we look at some of the in-between moves and some of the, we look at things from just an arbitrary perspective, January 1st of 19 to 2020 of, January 1st, it's just an arbitrary perspective. But when you really start to dissect some of the major swings that took place, it gets a lot more interesting at that point. So starting with Bitcoin here, looking at the price of BTC, if we go to the start of 2019, the price of Bitcoin basically went up around 85-90% depending on what exchange you're looking at, but we were at around 3,800, 3,765, and at the peak, right at the top of the swing here that we saw in June was up 260%, a significant move, and I think caught many even bullish holders by surprise at how powerful and how strong the move was, considering it was kind of a, we were coming off of a very bearish season and we had just broken below 6K and things were kind of looking, weak, and we were all looking just for a little bit of a counter trend bounce. And even myself, I thought we'd see a pause at 6K and some pullback, and just surprising at how strong it was, rallied very strongly, going up 267%, a powerful move for a market cap so big. And of course, then giving it not all back, but giving quite a bit back here. But if you looked at where you started 2019 from and where you ended, all in all, was still a very positive year, especially considering, most of the other names, how bad of a year they had. And when you really compare this, to other asset classes, right? The S&P, which is like the benchmark for so many things. You look at it compared to gold and compared to, major asset classes, then Bitcoin vastly outperformed then. Obviously, when you look at things like individual stocks, right? You look at the price of Tesla or Amazon or Apple last year, did very well, right? Apple performed just as strongly as Bitcoin did for 2019. And so, you got to look at it from different angles. But all in all, I mean, if you just held Bitcoin at the end of last year and you're okay, right? You're up almost double, right? So it was not a bad year for Bitcoin. So best hodl for 2019, the award goes to Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin proved to be the king crypto once again. We saw the Bitcoin dominance rise, smashing most of the alts, as we will see here shortly when we look at some of those alt charts, especially when you look at the alt BTC pairs. The picture is not pretty. many of those names just lost significant value relative to Bitcoin, in the high double digits, right? 50%, 60%, 70% down versus Bitcoin. And so it was not a pretty year for most of the names. So best hodl goes to BTC, King Crypto again. Now looking at the best or the biggest winner, again, this is going to exclude a lot of the small cap, micro cap, ICOs, whatever, that just had a 10,000% link run. But the biggest winner, for me at least, in terms of just my personal opinion, goes to Link. And it was the biggest winner in two ways. So let's look at Link BTC here. Just going calendar to calendar versus Bitcoin, right? If you just look at 2019 performance versus Bitcoin, was up 233%. A very nice move. If you look at it on the USD scale, it had a powerful move. Let's go to, I'll just do Tether here. And starting at the beginning of 2019, again, this is January 18, we can pull another exchange up. But you look at the move it had, if you start from the very beginning of January, it was up, nearly 1,000%. I mean, just an insane move. Even after a pretty steep pullback here over the last couple of months, I mean, not huge, but pretty steep, it's still up. I think let me go to a different exchange, because it was up something like 500% here on the USD side. So Link is the biggest winner for me in terms of 2019 performance here. Let me find a Link USD. I don't want to look at it on Kraken here. I think Link USD Tether is going to probably be our best bet there. But the BTC pair really shows it well, especially when we start comparing it to other altcoins. Many altcoins just have the complete opposite look when you compare them relative to Bitcoin. So the biggest winner all around, Link in 2019, turned out to be much bigger than I anticipated. It was just huge. I think it started the year at something like 40 cents, and at the peak was $4 plus. So just a fantastic move for Link here. Let's see here. Best trade. Now this is going to surprise a lot of you guys. I think it was the best trade in terms of how clean and how predictable it was, both on the long side and the short side. For me, the best trade was Litecoin. Now that caught a lot of people by surprise, but you got to keep in mind, Litecoin had the halving, which happened in August. Let me drop a line there for us. And so there was certainly some front running that took place into the halving, and it topped well before that. Of course, it topped along with Bitcoin and the rest of the market, and there was just no reprieve after that. So here's the halving here. I think there was a blip on the day it happened, but it was the best trade. I mean, it was just so clean. It gave multiple entries. Even if you were just held it, it was probably the better hold. I mean, look at how steady, 45-degree angle trend. And if you were trading it actively, after the big breakout Litecoin or Bitcoin had, this one followed suit. It gave you several bases along the way. There was a beautiful setup there, ascending triangle base, explosive breakout, a little bit of a pullback here. I mean, just multiple great trading opportunities that led to, some pretty decent percentage gain moves. If you manage to catch even some of that, there's 40% there. There's 37% there. There's 45% there. I mean, this breakout here was a 62% move. And once it topped, it was pretty clear, and it was just a straight drop. You could have shorted that if that's what you're inclined to do. And so all around, from a trading perspective, Litecoin proved to be the best trade. In terms of, sticking to some technical analysis, signals, and strategies that I personally like to follow, this one just, it did well from that perspective. So often you see those names, or they're setting up a certain way, and there's just a lot of whipsaw. You get chopped up, and they don't really follow through. But this one turned out to be a nice trade. Run up, pre-halvening, topped, and just collapsed after that. From a holding perspective, if you look at year to year, it doesn't look like Litecoin did a whole lot, but you got to look at them between, right? If you look at it from year to year, like, okay, it's up, depending on where you measure it, maybe double digits, but not a big year. But you got to remember, Litecoin had a significant move up before topping. At the peak, it was up around 350% from the lows of, and this is versus USD, in December of last year, it was hitting a low of $22, and it peaked this year near $145. And so a very strong move, but of course it gave almost all of that back, ending the year in the $40 range. So Litecoin takes the award for best trading coin for me. If you're just joining, we did Bitcoin. Bitcoin is best hold. Biggest winner was Link. All right, let's do the most volatile. Now that's a little bit tougher, right? Because we're talking volatility here, and volatility is crypto's middle name when it comes to trading. You get some moves all over the place here, but I'm gonna give the most volatile award to Matic, and I think many of you guys would agree with that. Matic caught a lot of people by surprise, both up and down. So if we look at the year here, this is Matic BTC on Binance. This is back here in April of 2019. And I mean, the initial move from its debut was an insane parabolic move after it found a low that took it up, about 900% in a very short period of time, less than 2 weeks. And so just an insane move followed by just a as dramatic drop, dropping here 60 some percent before bouncing, and then eventually giving back most of that move by the middle of the summer. And it just ground everybody down. If you jumped on this anywhere here near along the line, you were a loser on Matic because of the just pronounced drop it had. I mean, it was these last two candles. Let me zoom in on those for you guys. I mean, this is 2 days right here, this dramatic top that it had. That's 2 days. I mean, just an insane move that it had here, 140% in 2 days, and just gave it all back, and just kind of just lost there. It was just done. Looked like it was flat, left for dead here. And then out of nowhere, the volume started to come back in. It broke out of a very nice long-term consolidation. I remember we were looking at this setup here, and then it had a good run, and then eventually broke this setup here and went on a monster run for a couple of weeks. Very big move again. And then, of course, the Matic candle. Some of you guys were sleeping, waking up to a catastrophic collapse in the price of Matic in no time, giving it all back. So the most volatile award for 2019, hands down, has got to go to Matic. So if you just held Matic blindly through the year, what a roller coaster ride. If you tried to trade it, even crazier ride, but maybe you managed to take some gains along the way. So there is Matic. Now I have some runner-ups. There's been, obviously this is crypto, there's plenty of dramatic ups and downs. A couple of big ones that I would give runner-up most volatile moves to. Raven was a good one. It had, just this out of nowhere pop off the lows, very volatile at the top, very choppy, eventually giving it all back here by the end of the year. Another one along the same lines, Engine. If you look at Engine coin here, very similar to Raven, big spike up, giving it all back. Made for some fantastic trading if you were able to catch some of those moves, but the volatility was certainly very tough to trade. A lot of parabolic type of moves there. So that's it for what I'm looking at in terms of most volatile. Now let's see here, most overhyped. Now, crypto's tough. It's all about hype, and everything is going to be the next best thing since sliced bread, the next Ethereum, the next Bitcoin, the next blah blah blah, whatever, right? The next decentralized this and that. But I'm gonna say this one's kind of easy. The most overhyped coin, hands down, has got to be Tron, and largely because of its founder and lead cheerleader, Justin, as you guys know, likes to overhype the hell out of this coin, right? Oh, I'm having lunch with Warren Buffett. My coin's gonna go to $1 million. And this is the most overhyped. And I say it's overhyped because it failed to deliver. Yes, I know they have 1 million dApps that are running and more than Ethereum. And yes, I know BitTorrents and DLive. I get it. All right. But the most overhyped coin is giving you the most dismal results for how wonderful it is when you read it on Twitter. Down about 80% from January's peaks here. And so most overhyped award versus Bitcoin has got to go to Tron this year. I would say XRP was probably the winner in years past. Yeah, it's still definitely overhyped, but in 2019, I think Tron took the cake in terms of being the most overhyped tech and, fantastic future that it's going to have. Now, I'm not 100% against Tron. I really do hope some of the stuff, they're promoting and that's going to change things works. We want something like that to work, right? I mean, we want a decentralized platform and decentralized media and decentralized streaming. So, I mean, of course, that's what drove so many people to space, but there's just a lot of hype, and Tron's certainly one of those. All right, let's see here. Biggest surprise. There's been a lot of them through the year. Raven, Matic, obviously. There's been a couple of good surprises. I think BNB caught a lot of people by surprise at the start of the year. It started its little run, and it just seemed like it was never going to come back down ever again. It just was going crazy up, about 200%, and then of course gave a lot of it back. But overall, I would say the biggest surprise for me was Tezos, especially in the second half of the year. I think a lot just because of the history it had, and some of the the doom and gloom and the lawsuits, and just it started off so promising and then it ended so badly, and then out of nowhere it just comes back. And so overall, biggest surprise award has to go to Tezos. I mean, it's had a good move, and let's see if it comes back, and let's see if 2020 is going to be a dominant year for it. Now, big picture, if it starts to take out some of these, these big, most recent resistance levels, then this could be into new high territory going into 2020. So we'll see how this one turns out, but that's got to be the biggest surprise all around, especially over the last couple of months going into the year end. All right, biggest loser. So before I decide what the biggest loser is, and I kind of already have, let's take a step back and look at some of these names. Right now, this is versus Bitcoin. If you saw the chart that I posted on Twitter yesterday, where I said, these are the coins that moved up and down this year and how many, there was some interesting stats. When I looked at the top 50 names, so the 50 names that were on the list at the start of 2019, right? Obviously, the top 50 names changed throughout the year. There was at the end of the year, there was nine changes, right? 9 new names that came into the list. But out of the top 50 names, only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Only 11 names finished positive versus USD. Some of them just barely. The biggest winners in that were Tezos, Link, BNB, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, finished positive. Now, versus Bitcoin, however, only 3 finished positive. Out of the top 50, every other name was negative versus Bitcoin, and usually by a big amount. You're talking 50%, 60%, 70%. So it was just a dismal year for the alts, especially relative to Bitcoin, and we saw that in the Bitcoin dominance number as strong as it was. So very quickly, if we cycle through some of these names, you look at names like Cardano. Some of the moves, right? Keep in mind, if you look at just end to end, right, it was down 58%. But certainly Q1 was nice, and I remember trading Cardano at the start of last year, and it was a great trade. And at the peak, it was up 70% very quickly into April, and then after Bitcoin broke out on April 1st, it was pretty much just a straight drop till about August. And you'll notice when we look at a lot of these charts, August and September has turned out to be a significant low point so far for a lot of these altcoins, and we're watching them starting to form a big accumulation zone, but we haven't seen any major breakouts yet. A lot of them have, Link, Tezos, but across the board, some of these names that are still putting in these long tails, certainly something to keep an eye on going into 2020. But you can see peak to peak, a big drop all around for the year, down about 57%. Let's start with another big name, Bitcoin Cash, right? And we know there's a lot of volatility here and the fork and all that stuff, but if you look at just where it started the year and where it ended, versus Bitcoin Cash lost 34% of its value. Dash, it was already coming off of a pretty rough year. 2018 versus Bitcoin was a rough year for Dash, finishing down 80%, and it did not get better going into the new year. We saw it lose another 73% of its value versus Bitcoin, and so very, very poor performance for Dash. If you look at EOS EOS had a little bit of a strong pop. Now this is a name I like to trade often. This is one I always have on my radar. But EOS went up about 65%, like many of these top tier alts did at the first quarter. You looked at Cardano and EOS and Icon and IOTA. Some of them had a little bit of a move, but then they gave it all back, and EOS lost a pretty significant amount, down 71% from the peak. At the end of the year, finished down about 50% versus Bitcoin. Ethereum, another big cap name, very poor performance versus Bitcoin. Did very little to try to keep up. Didn't barely even get into the positive for the year. You saw it up a little bit, up 20%, then gave it up. Then up again about 10%, then gave it up. And it has just been a drop since. For a big cap name, that's pretty rough, down 50% versus Bitcoin. Looking at XRP. Where's the January? Here we go, January 1st. XRP, brutal. Down 74%, no life whatsoever. Showed a brief counter trend rally, and that was a nice counter trend rally on a percentage basis, up 50%. But all in all, just a pretty rough year for XRP, down 70% versus Bitcoin. Some of the other top tier names, right? So we'll just go down the list here real quick. Tron. We saw Tron already, most overhyped, had a pretty good run up initially, gave it most of it all back at the end of the year, finishing down about 67%. Neo, no life in Neo. I was looking for some more action there. Had a little bit of a pop, but gave it all up. Now we did see the pro-China blockchain pump, but again, was down 58%, but still down about 40% at the end of the year. OMG, remember that name from yesteryear? No life left in OMG, down 77% versus Bitcoin. Litecoin, as we just saw, had a pretty good run up, outperformed Bitcoin by about 132%, but at the end of the year, when it was all said and done, was negative versus Bitcoin, down about 28%. And we can go on and on. IOTA, no love here in IOTA, down 75%. And so from the top tier names, biggest loser, it's going to have to go to Dash. And it wasn't necessarily the biggest loser on a percentage basis, but when you start to factor in, and I have nothing against the Dash team. I think they're a great bunch of folks and smart people, and I mean, they're even based here out of Arizona, so I got nothing personal against the project or anything like that, but I do follow it. And what they have been trying to do for so long has just not come to fruition yet. And you're seeing a lot of people continue to dump this one, and they're still trying to find their footing. It's lost a lot of ground versus Bitcoin, all that good stuff. And so just no momentum. Project-wise is still lacking, as well as the price of the token. And if you look at Dash versus USD, we'll go to Tether here. Just looking at it from the peak here, and this $185 peak in June, down to $42. Yikes. Hey, Dash Masternode now is only $42,000. Remember when it was like $1 million? So there's been certainly other ones. I think a good runner-up to biggest loser here is probably going to be Stellar Lumens. Stellar down 80% versus Bitcoin. The smacking there. They were burning tokens at the end of the year. And this is coming off of a very strong 18. When most names were getting hammered versus Bitcoin, this was building a very big base. Was a name that was high on my radar. Was looking like it was about to break out from this range. On the weekly chart would have been a fabulous breakout. They had partnerships. There was IBM and all this other stuff. And no dice. Whew, the big drop. And so there you have it. I would say biggest losers, Dash, Stellar, and then maybe IOTA in terms of top tier names, just from the project perspective, as well as they have these partnerships and all this stuff, but the token price at least is not showing any of that here. And so those are my thoughts here. Let's see, why is the audio so bad? Oh man, is my mic? No, my mic's good. Okay. Well, my mic's not good, but it's plugged in. So to wrap it up here, biggest winner, I'm going to go with Link on that guy there. Biggest winner all around, and certainly one to watch. Now, it's always interesting to see that, Link had a pretty strong move, and then a little bit of a pullback into September, and then of course you got the hype from the pump groups, ran it up a little bit, and it has been pulling back here a little bit as of late. If you look at Link USD, after that September run up, it's pretty much right back down to where it was in that September frame before the pump announcement. So it kind of gave a lot of that back there. But all in all, for the year, percentage-wise, from where it started, very big move all around. So Link. Best trade, LTC. I explained why I thought that was the best trade. If you missed that, but we had the halvening, a very steady trend, and then a very steady decline. You could have traded that long and short either way. Best hodl, best hold for the year, hands down. It's got to go to Bitcoin. All things considering, had a good year, has certainly given back a lot, but just a very surprising move at the start of the year. Biggest losers we just covered. Most volatile, very easily has got to go to Matic. And what else? Most overhyped was the Tron, and the biggest surprise was Tezos. What are your thoughts? I know that, again, this is my personal opinion. This is my very subjective view of the crypto world, and so certainly there's not a huge scientific data that went into a lot of this. I did crunch the numbers though. Last night I was looking at a lot of different numbers. What was up? What was down? What were the biggest percentage moves? And there was certainly some interesting things, but all in all, was just kind of a red year for the crypto space. Here's Monero. Yeah, pretty straight decline. Now, what does that mean for going into 2020, right? Now, if you look at the crypto history here, the very brief history for many of these names, right? I mean, many of these names didn't even exist prior to 2017 or 2018. There's two schools of camp. You've got to look at it from, okay, if I'm just blindly holding, not managing, just accumulating, then your time horizon has to be very long, right? And if you look at something like Bitcoin, it has proven that, just long-term hold has proven to be a good thing for Bitcoin. And if I had to hold anything long-term, right, if I only had one coin to buy and I couldn't sell it for 5 years or 10 years, it would clearly be Bitcoin. But from the altcoin perspective, it's a lot trickier. And the school of thought is, do you just hold these things? Are they even worth anything? Is there any sort of intrinsic value to them? Are they just utility? Are they purely speculation? If the project succeeds, does that necessarily translate into a valuation increase for the token? And we've learned that no, the answer is no, of course not, right? We've seen the hype and the valuation deflation in 2018, and that continued into 2019, looking at something like Icon versus Bitcoin is just kind of flatlining here, right? Now, some of them will rally, some of them will certainly have big moves, but all in all, we've learned that, 2019 proved to be another year that was a little bit more geared towards the traders. Those that were active, those that were managing, those that were catching some of the moves. Now, of course, you did catch, nobody's ever going to catch the exact top and the exact bottom of every swing. And that's not the point of trading, right? The point of trading is to look for the best time, those breakout opportunities, the momentum that's going to get you, the biggest gain in the least amount of time for the least amount of risk, right? And you look at little cup and handle breakouts like this and these ascending bases, right? The trends, right? Those made for good trades. You could have scalped them along. This is daily chart, right? You're not necessarily trading 5-minute charts. This is, you can hold this for a couple of days, couple of weeks. And so trading proved to be the winner here in 2019. Is that going to be the case in 2020? And to be honest with you, I'm starting to lean in favor of accumulating some of these alts and holding them for a little bit longer time horizon. Things like Mana, things like, even ETH that are just so beaten up and beaten down versus Bitcoin. We're heading into the halvening for Bitcoin. History has proven that after the halvening, the price of Bitcoin generally goes up. And so you have to factor that in. But I'm also looking at some of these alts that I don't think will go away. I think they will stay around. And so I'm looking at some of the valuations going, well, maybe this might not be a bad time to start looking at accumulating, building up positions in some of these names that if we see a surprise alt season in 2020, which I think we will, what's going to be, some of those big winners that make sense to hold for now. And it's never easy, especially when things are looking like this and they're just really dropping off and looking like there's no bottom in sight. And so you certainly have to be, picky in what you pick. The things that I'm looking for are those that have already started to turn the corner, or those that are doing something like this, right? When you look at the big picture and they've gone down and gone down and gone down, and all of a sudden for the last several months, they're kind of just starting to flatline, maybe building a little bit of accumulation. Those are the ones I'm starting to keep an eye on. The ones that have pulled back quite a bit, maybe those names that are starting to bounce off the lows. But you look at things like EOS and Cardano and some of those platform names, I'm going to be keeping an eye on those. And of course the big winners, but you got to keep in mind, generally the big winners from the prior year is not always the big winner in the next year, and there's usually some sort of accumulation or consolidation period. So that's what I'm going to be watching. Neo, right? Some of those names, Ontology, they're starting to maybe put in a base. There's no confirmation of a low yet, but certainly starting to keep an eye on those and seeing if, on a bounce back. And you got to keep in mind, from a percentage basis, right? I'm not expecting that these guys are going to all of a sudden turn the corner and go straight back up and make new all-time highs. I am certainly not expecting anywhere near that. If that happens in the next major alt cycle, then great, but I'm not expecting anything near that. But if you look at it from a percentage basis, right, risk-reward ratios, even if you take a shot at something here and you're willing to give it 20, 30, 40% to the downside, the upside potential is, even a little bit of a bounce takes you up 100%, 200% on some of these names. That's because they're just so beaten up. And so I'm looking at it from a risk-reward perspective, right? If I'm risking X amount on the downside, even if I risk half of whatever I invest, is there the potential to double or triple that on the way up? And some of these certainly look at that. So good question. I haven't looked at Cosmos, Adam. There were certainly names that were not on the 2019 list at the start, obviously, but turned out to be big ones. I think Atom was one of the bigger ones. There was a lot of other ones, but this one probably was the strongest from the September low. Not near the highs, right? Technically is still red on the year, but when you look at it from this time frame, very strong name. Many others didn't fare quite as well, right? Some of these other names, there's Harmony, and there's Dusk, there's Elgo, right? So Phantom. I'm looking at a few names here, but certainly I think Atom warrants being one of the stronger ones. Could have probably won the award for biggest surprise, but I think that one goes to Tezos. What moving averages am I using there? I'm using the 10 EMA and the 22 EMA. So exponential moving averages is generally what I use, and those are my two favorites there. And I use a pair. And if you have access to the Node Insiders video courses, I talk about why I use a moving average pair, and the ratios, they don't have to be the 10 and the 22. There's really no magic moving average number. I think a lot of times people will look at the moving average and say, whichever one that whichever one the price bounces off of most and all that, right? And there are some moving averages where price will respect it, but it's not so much about did it move off of that as much as it is the value zone. So I use two. I talk about it in these videos. A rule of thumb is basically look for something that's about 2 to 2.5 times from the smaller one. So what that means is if you're using a 12 EMA, then go with the 26. If you're using a 10, go with the 20 or 22. If you're using an 8 EMA, go with an 18 EMA or as your double. So I'm always looking at 2 in terms of moving averages. Question on there. Are you still looking at technical progress on different projects, or are your decisions based mostly on the charts? So the short answer is I look at both. When it comes to long-term holds or things that I'm thinking, hey, may have a catalyst for a potential run in 2020, I certainly look at the fundamentals of the project and see if there's something that's going to move it. But I also look at the charts, just because you look at psychology and trading mindset. And you got to think if there is a surprise alt run, which I think there will be, some of those names that are kind of old time names that are favorites for traders that have good liquidity, that are readily available on different exchanges, not just one tiny exchange somewhere, right? When you look at those names, those are the ones that I keep an eye on because they tend to have some pretty good percentage moves, even if they're just a small counter trend rally. So I do certainly factor in technicals, but I'm also looking at fundamentals as well for long-term holds. So it's definitely both. I will start at the charts always. I generally always start at the charts. Just because when you start at the fundamental level, I mean, that's a ton of work. That's a ton of research to do. I mean, you know, to keep track of all those. There's a few favorites that I have that I keep track of, but just kind of keep an eye on all of the names. It's a big job. All right, let me see here. I'm just looking at some of the comments here, catching up. So looking at the price of Bitcoin. This is the 4-hour view again. The whipsaw, the chop that we've seen here over the last few days. Pretty much just range bound here. If we zoom in after the big move on December 18th, you know, there's been some attempts, but it's just still very much range bound. Not a lot of change in terms of key levels. You know, that 7,000 level is certainly a level to be watching. Near term, you know, 7,600 just remains the same number that I've been keeping an eye on here for some time. And so, you know, breaking out of that range will certainly help. If it decides to pull back, there's been talk about this little inverse head and shoulder potentially forming. It's not as pronounced as I would like. It's not a true inverse head and shoulder. You don't have that big, deep W pattern. But, you know, there's certainly a low there. There was a low there. If you get a shakeout that lands higher than this prior low that we saw here on December 18th, then yeah, I think that the signature is there for a potential psychology, you know, breakout based on the psychology, the patterns here of this price action. But the number is going to be the same either way, right? Whether, regardless if you call it a pattern or a knot or this is the head and shoulders, at the end of the day, horizontal price, support resistance levels, that's the most important thing. And if you looked at that, then you'd be looking at the same breakout point. Now, if it does turn out to be a head and shoulder, I don't generally wait until it breaks out to enter a trade, right? What I look for is a low point here, and I take a better risk reward entry there, because then if you get in here and you use your swing low as a stop, by the time it hits to the neckline where it's breaking out, I'm taking some profits already, right? Just because it's hitting some resistance, you take some off the table at that point. And then if it breaks out, you keep some on. The alternative trade is it breaks out, it pulls back to support, you get some on there, and you're looking for another leg up, right? So there's different ways to trade that, but generally the inverse head and shoulder, if that's what's going to play out, I'll look for that shakeout, and then if it looks like it's finding a low point, starts to reverse, that's a good place to throw a position on. That's usually how I'll trade that. Let's see what else here. Top 5 picks for 2020. Yeah, that's tough. Because it's tough from two ways, right? Because if you're saying I got to hold it from here until 2021, there's going to be a lot of this along the way, right? And very rarely do I do that, right? Unless it's for tax reasons, but very rarely do I do that. It's going to be, hey, if this thing goes parabolic, take some off. I don't care if it's, middle of the year. So that's a hard answer to say. I think Bitcoin would be one to certainly look at for a long-term hold. Yeah, I think BAT's looking good. I think Mana is one to keep an eye on this year. Tron is the most hyped coin in the world, so you definitely got to keep an eye on that. But there's a lot. Top 5. I'm gonna have to come back to you guys on that list and maybe throw some names out that I'm gonna be watching for 2020. And I haven't done a price prediction for 2020, so maybe I'll do a price prediction for that guy there. But I tend to stick to the bigger cap names in terms of, if I had to hold something for longer term, something a little bit solid, right? Link certainly in the top of the list here. So what we got moving here today? So we got Waves, Ethland, or they changed their name, but Land, I still call it Ethland. Zens, EOS, Bitcoin Cash. So not a whole lot in this choppy market. Let's go look at Waves real quick. Waves trending here as of late after a massive dump here over the last, but yeah, this one's interesting. Kind of breaking out again after a little bit of consolidation. Certainly, that was not an easy setup, but definitely an easy setup to watch, right? You had that massive move. This yellow line is a prior breakout point, and then you had a few attempts at that line, a few attempts at the line, and then of course it finally breaks out of range, a little bit of a breakout, a throwback to the breakout point, and it's get going again. So certainly respecting some support and resistance levels. So that's waves. What do we got? We got BAT, NEO. Let's go take a look at some of these here. I'm going to stick to the 4-hour charts for these. Looking at BAT, BTC. Having a good day today after a good pullback right into those moving averages, bouncing off. Starting to break out here a little bit. Some clearing some resistance there. It attempted it a few days ago, pulled back, but here it is right back at it. So definitely looking pretty good versus Bitcoin here. NEO, a little bit of trending action. We'll see. It needs to get up over this line here, but near term, having a good action here today. We'll see if we can break this downtrend right there. What else here? I think we looked at EOS. EOS has been trending a little bit, but if you look at the daily chart, not necessarily a strong looking chart yet. Engine Rift token. Okay. Land. Let's go see Land. And Land. Big pop off the lows. Let's go to the daily chart on Land here. Secondary move after that big move we saw a few weeks back on November. And here it is attempting massive volume on this most latest move here. All right, so what's the bot status say here? Let's let this load up here. This is looking at the top 20 names or so. And there's a few open slots here. So for the Node Insiders, I'm going to get some requests and I'll add those to the list so they're here. And we'll just update that, the 3 rotating names. I'll update those maybe once or every month or two. So the bot status, at least it's not short everything. I remember a week ago, this was just red across the board. The bot status was not long any names. And this again, I'm going to go daily chart to see what's strong on the daily time frames. NEO, it's long on NEO, it's long on BAT, it's long on Atom. It's still short Tron, Bitcoin Cash, Stellar, Cardano, Monero, Link, IOTA, Dash, still short. And it's flat on Tezos, Binance, XRP, EOS, Litecoin, and ETH. And only long a handful of names. Now the 4-hour chart, if you look at the 4-hour time frame, obviously the volatility is going to be a little bit more there. So let me see, flat most names here. It's only short Litecoin, Tron, Bitcoin Cash, Stellar, and it's long EOS, NEO, BAT, and Atom. So there you have it. Okay. Well, my friends, that's going to probably be it for today. Welcome to 2020. A few things as we head into the new year. There's going to be some video updates that I'm going to be working on here, kind of focusing on teaching a little bit more about how to use some of these indicators, what they mean, how I use them, how they're derived, the trending list, how is it derived, just kind of a lot of helping understand what all this is. And then, of course, I'll be putting these videos on the education page as well. I'll do some live streams to do some Q&A for the subscribers. But, just kind of teaching you guys how and what these mean and how I use them, what the BMI is, the Bull Momentum Index, and how it's used for my trading strategies and all that good stuff here. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Appreciate you guys being here. I hope you all have a wonderful start to the new year. Wonderful rest of your week. And until next time, take care, everyone.